This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/RubyRogues. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Eric Berry.
Hey there.
Dave Kimura.
Hey everybody.
David Richards.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Sebastian Sogamoso. I hope I said that something close to right.
You did a great job.
Do you want to quickly introduce yourself and let us know who you are?
Sure. So as you said, my name is Sebastian. I am a software developer, been doing software for around 6 years. In Ruby for the last 5 years. Before I did a little bit of Java and PHP. I think a lot of people have at some point in their careers. And I live in, I'm currently living in Panama City. I used to live in Colombia where I grew up. I just moved here a few months ago. I work for a company called CookPad, work remotely for them. And I also organize a Ruby conference in Colombia. We've been doing it for 3 years. This is going to be our 4th year. It's going to be in September, probably. We're still finding the date, but I'd like to invite people to attend.
Very cool. And you spoke at RubyConf. You talked about how you really messed some stuff up, which was kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just dive right in.
I got to say, we have a lot of guests, and some of the guests we have on, we talk about things that are a little bit more technical and a little bit more in depth than what I'm used to thinking about, right? And a lot of those ones I kind of tune out a little bit just because it's so deep. It's beyond what I'm allowing myself to understand. But when I saw the topic that we're bringing you on for, I know I'm an expert. I'm an absolute expert in failing, right? So I'm super excited about this topic because I am so good at failing. And I can't wait to hear your stories and what you got going on there.
Yep. I'm glad to hear that you're also an expert. And to be honest, I think we all are. It's just like we don't talk a lot about our failures and the times we screw up because it's embarrassing. It's not something that we feel proud of. And that's kind of like the point that took me, that gave me courage to talk about this at a conference and like to tell everyone about the biggest I've gone through. I don't know. Should I tell the story again, or what do you guys think?
Yeah, go ahead and tell the story. I don't know how many people have watched the talk. We'll just make sure we don't take 25 minutes on the story.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do it briefly. So, I used to work for this company that had a carpooling app. So the whole idea was to get people to carpool to work and back home together each day. And people could have like a carpool where different persons, where a different person drove every day. Or you could even be part of different carpools or on different days of the week. So basically, what the app did was keep track of all of that, and then once a week, take care of the payment part of those things, which is kind of like what people dread the most about carpooling. So what the system did is basically just look at the records of the trip each person took that week, and then charge them for the trips they took, and then pay the drivers of those trips in case they weren't driving. So that was kind of like what the system did. Just to give a little bit of context. Then what happened? So the thing is that like this process, I don't know why we decided that it was a good idea to have this process run on Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. And then like on a given Saturday morning, I started to get a lot of complaints from users and calls from users angry that were really angry because when they were like about to, I don't know, buy groceries or pay for breakfast that they found out that either their bank accounts were empty or their credit cards were maxed out. So that they didn't start really well, as you can imagine. And what then happened as we started to dig into the problem was that we had, I would say, like two very kind of like simple bugs, but which in combination were like very powerful and very harmful. And those were that we basically, so let's say that we had 1,000 trips that we needed to charge that week. So we got all of those. What the system did was basically get all of those 1,000 trips, put them on a queue, and then process them one by one. The thing is that week, because of a code change, we were not putting those trips only one time in the queue, but we were putting them 1,000 times. So we were putting each trip as many times as trips we had to charge. So it was like, you can imagine the amount of trips we were charging that week.
Oh.
And so that was the first bug. And that was really bad, but that could have been like contained if the second bug wasn't present. And the second one, it's debatable if it's a bug or not. I think it is, but the thing is that we were not checking if we had already charged the user for that trip, which we should have. And then we just kept charging them over and over and over until basically we were out of trips. Fortunately, we stopped the process before that happened, but the damage was already done.
That's amazing. And we did an episode a few weeks ago where we talked about emergencies and things like that. We did it right around Christmas, so we were talking about over the holidays or weekends or inconvenient times as well. But it's interesting because I think a lot of the focus of that show was more around, well, if I messed it up, the system went down, or it wasn't showing the right data, or maybe it even corrupted data. I mean, this is something that's like, in your talk, it was, I went to get breakfast and it, my credit card was declined because you guys messed up. So, if it's impactful like that, not just, hey, I can't use your service, but, your service just sucked my bank account dry. I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, that's a really good question. It's tough because, so what we did actually, and I think it wasn't a good decision at the moment, what we did right away was like the most obvious thing, which is trying to revert what just happened. So that when you use payment gateways, you can do refunds on every charge you do, right? So we went straight away and issued refunds for everyone. And the thing is that refunds take normally 5 business days to get into the user's account. So when your credit card is maxed out and like your account is empty, that's not a good that 5 days is a lot, because you need to pay for everything, right? So one of the things we did for users who they didn't want to wait 5 days was to actually we reached out to all of them. It took a long time, but we offered them other options to send them their money faster. So one of them, for example, was just sending them a check for the exact amount we had charged them, and then we on our own decided what to do with the refund or whatever we had to do on our side. But we just offered them the quickest way possible, which was different in each case, to send them the money back in case they wanted. Some people were fine waiting, but some people weren't.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I think maxing out people's bank accounts doesn't sound like a sustainable business model. So what was the post-mortem like? With some kind of breach and stuff, you're usually going to see a lot of people move off to a different service. So did you see a huge decline in users afterwards, or was it, did it kind of rebound and climb back up? Did you restore that confidence to the clients?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially talking about confidence. So just before I answer your question, there's like two things about confidence when something like this happens that at least I learned after this. It's that like you're not only affecting the confidence that the user have on your product. It's also like the confidence that coworkers have on you if it was your fault, or in your team. In this case, it was like a team of people who were in charge of this, and like people didn't feel really good about what the software we were building after that. But okay, I'll go back to your question. So gaining users' trust again, it's really hard. So I'll tell you what happened, and then I'll tell you what I think in general about it. So what happened is like the users that were most affected, unfortunately, were like our most loyal users, because they were the ones who took more trips that week. So that put us in a really bad situation. Our policy at that point was to be really honest about what happened, like not try to lie, not try to say that something different happened, assume the responsibility, and actually be proactive reaching out to users. Some users, when we reached out to them, hadn't noticed that we had taken a lot of money away from them. And it's always better like that. It's always better when the company is reaching out to you to tell you, hey, we screwed up. We're sorry. This is what we're going to do to fix it. This is what we are offering to take care of the damage we did. So that's one of the things we did. But and like talking about like user decline or using switching apps or using leaving, we didn't have like a huge impact, to be honest. And that's very fortunate. But there was definitely people that left, people that stopped using the application. And I think that's something that's inevitable. It will always happen if you have like such a big problem, such a big mess up. You just have to like deal with the consequences. Like no one wants this to happen, but it's inevitable, I think. What I think anyone in this position should do is like be fully transparent to their users, be proactive. I think I already mentioned we did, and also another thing I think we did is to like offer users like the best solution possible, even if it's going to cost money to the company that. More money to the company that it's already costing, because it's like your reputation, and I think that's normally more costly than anything else, and probably the money you might end up spending by trying to do the best thing for your users.
It's harder to find in early stages when the failure is through a background job, when you're queuing up stuff. That's a really hard one to find, because it's actually not an error that's occurring. It's not going to go into rollbar. It's not going to, end up in your face. It's going to be something that typically you're going to find out down the road from a customer that, hey, you guys screwed up, and then you realize how bad it was. I've had that experience in the queue-based failures as well. The second point is. My mic screwing up totally made me lose the second point, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. So I think that that's a good question, and I think running stuff in the background is always going to be tricky, especially if you're thinking about testing and having good test cases that cover. Like edge cases, kind of like there's one. So there's a couple things that I actually think are important. So one is like you can still try to find ways to make sure that even things that aren't supposed to run synchronously work as expected. For example, you can inline like job executions when you're running your test suite and stuff like that. You can also have like a QA team, actually people testing the application, checking that what happens is what's expected to do. And I think this is somewhere where we failed, because we had like a QA team actually clicking buttons and running the app and stuff. And we didn't find this. And I'm not saying this is like a QA problem, but this is something that didn't work as it should have. And it was kind of our fault, because if the QA team would have had access like to the payment gateway, like the console, they could have probably noticed that it was already happening and that we were charging them like a lot of times. The problem is that when you are using like test cards, when you don't really have an account associated to it, and it's like a dummy card that has infinite amount of funds, you don't really care, right? And you won't know this unless you go and check with your like payment gateway to see that the operations that are happening there are actually the ones that should be happening. And this like leads me to something I think I mentioned in my talk, which I think is really important. Like, you can have good processes, like software development processes. You can have good test coverage. You can have code review. You can have a QA team like we did. You can have a lot of like this best practices that definitely help making software better. I'm not saying they don't, but still, like building software is a human process, and like we make mistakes, and sometimes we make mistakes collectively, and that's where this sort of thing happens. So it's always good to kind of like be prepared for this sort of things. Although having like safety nets it's always best option. They're not like bulletproof, and eventually they might fail.
I like what you're saying there about that plan. I was just thinking about how yesterday we had a problem with that. I work in a fintech company, and the bank we work with went down, and we had everybody in place so that there were some problems. We knew exactly how to handle it. Customers were getting called, and things were handled immediately. But I think it's that human component that, because like you said, people make mistakes, or other systems not in our control can go down, and we know what to do when it does.
Yeah, and one thing I was just going to mention that's sort of off topic. If you are using something like Stripe and background jobs, one, making sure the background jobs are idempotent. But also, I know I discovered this a few months ago, but Stripe actually has a idempotency key that you can pass in that would prevent multiple transactions. So if you have a recurring thing that happens once a week, you're charging users, you can set up a cache to where this key would live for X number of days for a particular user. And then if that same key is used again, then it's not going to recharge the user. So some stuff like that can help mitigate the risk, along with the QA, like you said, and automated tests.
Yeah, I think that's why.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's wise. I'm trying to remember the last day that I didn't deal with idempotency. I never thought about it. And then lately, it just seems like because I'm pushing money around, because I'm reporting on whether the money moved around, knowing that nothing was duplicated, it seems to be every single day, at least for the last 20 days, that's been my main task. It's really important when we move money. It's really important.
Yeah.
End of sentence.
Well, and it's not just with money. You don't want to have a recurring background job that's emailing a customer 1,000 times, because that's going to be, super annoying as well if you've never done that before. They don't appreciate that.
Yeah. Or report something to a boss and have something double counted.
Yeah, definitely. Idempotency is something that's really important to keep in mind always when programming. You're right. Not only when you're doing money related stuff, and yeah, like not only to keep it to make sure that your code is inputted, because that should be the first place where you make sure, but also like this also type of like safeguards that payment gateway have, like the one you mentioned, and also for example, there's something like a few queues have this as plugins or gems you can install, where they can also make sure that you don't add like the same thing over and over. They'll basically like put it off of the queue if you add the same thing more than once. There's a bunch of things you can do to deal with this sort of problem, but I learned this the hard way.
Well, and I don't want to gloss over the really good point which you're making. It's like, we're thinking about this, like, oh man, if only, or this is important. But the important thing was that you, as humans, saw the problem, addressed it, figured it out, because these things happen whether or not we think of all the things we could have thought of. The important part is failure happens, and now what? So you're making the good point. Now we're just thinking about, oh man, what if we could have? So I guess the engineering part of our minds are coming in. Man, we want to take the pain away, but I think that really taking the pain away is saying, it's going to happen. Doesn't matter how it happens. And now human beings are going to work together and do the hard thing first, and have integrity and the things that it takes.
I heard a story that really impacted me, and it was probably years and years ago. But I heard a story about this guy who owned a jet. He was this rich guy, owned a jet, had people that took care of it, and he went to the airport to fly, and one of the people that he hired had put the wrong fuel in the jet. And if you put the wrong fuel in a jet, it actually just destroys the jet. You can't come back from that. And so this guy's freaking out. He thought he was going to be fired. And he talked to the owner. And the owner says, will you ever make that mistake again? He said, no. He says, okay, go get my other jet ready. And then he asked him later, he said, why didn't you fire me? And he said that the reason I didn't fire you is because you, above anybody else, will never, ever make that mistake again. And I look at that as a developer and I think, wow, these, the bigger the failures, the bigger the learning process. I mean, look at what has got us to the point where we're at. It's more failures that drive us than successes. Right now, I'm learning Python and Django, and I'm constantly hitting walls and failing. But right now is like the most fruitful time where I'm learning the most. Anyway, I didn't mean to rant on that, but it kind of it really brought up part of the reason I'm passionate about your topic is because it's impacted me so directly as a developer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Eric. I think it's really important. Actually, like it's part of the experience of failing in such a big way, like being scared about losing your job, feeling like you're the worst developer that has ever existed, that this wouldn't have happened to someone else, then you're not only a failure at your job, but also like as a software developer, it can also like impact you in a personal level, and it was stressful. Like this, finding the bug, deploying a fix was kind of like the easy part. The hard part after this was dealing with the consequences and like the amount of time we have to spend like making things right for the user. For users, if you could call it that way, at least trying to own the mistake and deal with it the best way possible. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this when I get to talk at RubyConf, but like one of the things I recommend people after like dealing with something like this, like taking a few days off, if it's possible, like decompress, because it can be really stressful. Taking a few days off, it's always good. And also keeping in mind that like your failures don't define you. If something, they'll just help you be a better developer. As you said with the example you just gave, it's amazing, because that's exactly what my manager at the time told us in the team that we're dealing with payments. Like, this cost a lot of money to the company. It was a really expensive lesson that you learned. It's like it's the worst time to like let someone in the team go, because like you just learned a really expensive lesson. And if you go work elsewhere, they are the ones that are going to benefit from that, not the company. I was lucky that my boss at the time thought like that. I know that's not always the case, but still, it's from this like big moments of like failure and trouble that we learn the most, I think.
You know, I think you're right, and it also, from a management perspective, kind of asks, well, you know, what kind of learning is valuable? I mean, we're going to pay for it, right? We're going to send them to a conference. We're going to work together as a team. So as we invest in knowledge, you know, this is like you just said, the really expensive things. It's like a different kind of accounting. To say, yeah, my team is really, really smart because I know they're not going to make these terrible decisions again, or I'm pretty sure that they're better than most at these really important things.
Interview cake makes coding interviews a piece of cake. Here's the problem with most coding interview practice. You work on a problem, bang your head against the wall, give up, and look up the answer. And then you're like, what? How do you even come up with something like that? That's why Interview Cake teaches you step by step how to come up with clever algorithms. They break it down into a simple set of patterns that can be applied to any problem. To learn more, check out interviewcake.com/RubyRogues. Ruby Rogues listeners get 20% off Interview Cake's full online coding interview prep course. To sign up today, go to interviewcake.com/RubyRogues. So how do you make sure that these issues don't come up again? Because you mentioned in your talk that, you know what, we had tests, we did all the right things, so to speak, and it didn't work. So do you just write more tests to make sure you don't have a regression? Or are there other things you can do to mitigate similar types of issues beyond that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we did a lot of things. One of them was actually what you just said, add more tests, make sure that we are covering the cases we didn't. And that was part of it. Also, something we did, which is really particular to this problem, is we kind of like built a fake payment gateway that we used in production. Actually, each week before running the actual process. Using the actual payment gateway, the real payment gateway. So what this allowed us was basically to run the whole like payment process or the billing process each week, just to make sure that the end result was exactly what we were expecting. This was kind of like I would say a very costly solution or way to deal with this. And it wasn't, and like the plan was never to keep doing this forever, basically running the payment process twice, doing like for the rest of the eternity, basically. But the idea was to have something that allowed us to like gain confidence back, not only in ourselves in the process, but also like from the rest of the company, because as I mentioned before, like that's also another part that you have to deal with. And it's like what your colleagues and like your what other people working with you think or feel about the work you're doing after something like this happens, because they're part of the same company, they're in the same boat that you are, and they're being impacted by your screw up, and it's probably not a good feeling to be in that position. So building stuff around the work you're doing. And that stuff can be tools like the one I just mentioned, like better communication channels, being really open about the progress you're making to fixing the problem, and reporting on progress and sharing results, and being just in general transparent with the rest of the company will also help in that, which I also think it's quite important.
You know, one area I see that I really like what you're saying, how important that is. And one area that sometimes we complain a lot about, but it's probably a really very valuable thing, is the difference between sales and development. Because if we're in a tough situation, the one place we're gonna multiply the pain the most is in the sales organization, and it almost like a canary in the mind. How bad is it? What do we need to do? If they're completely lost and confused, then communication. I was in the lunchroom yesterday, and a salesperson was saying something that was completely inaccurate. I said, "Oh my goodness, we haven't communicated well." It's a good time to say, like what you're saying, yeah, we want to do that thing, and we know we've done that thing if the sales team gets it, because that's the furthest away from where we are.
Yeah. So now that I've shared like my biggest screw up with you and every listener. Do you guys have any story that I want to share also about like some kind of like similar situation that you've been in the past?
I never screw up.
Do I have to pick just one?
Do you mean like accidentally deploying the wrong tag to your production environment and completely crashing the system and getting all kinds of wonky results only to realize that a few days later what actually happened? Yeah. I've done that before.
I've accidentally deleted a prod database.
I accidentally deleted root once, and the server that I deleted. This was back in the 90s. The server I deleted had about a month's worth of work on it that wasn't anywhere else. A month's worth of a team's work. So that we're talking about 5 or 6 person months worth of work that was lost.
Oh man.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, and I feel like from my experience too, is like what you came away with was, yeah, I had that shock and that fear and that desire to run away, or, like my initial reaction wasn't anything more than a 4-year-old would have. But then after a minute, I realized, okay, but I'm here. And then I walk in, I say, I just did this. And okay. And we go to work and we start handling it. We start communicating. And then we have that awkward conversation afterwards. Okay, what do you now know? And I'm wondering if that next conversation is, okay, you're fired. And it wasn't. It was, what do you now know? And that's critical. And maybe sometimes we don't now know how to avoid it in the future, but we're aware of the bigger picture, which is valuable.
Yeah, I agree. And something I also think it's a good idea. It's when like writing a postmortem, which was also something we did. It's like the whole process, the whole idea of learning from the lesson. Learning a lesson from what happened. It's not about like finding the culpable or the person that was who screwed up, who wrote the line of code that created the bug. That's not really the point, and that's really not what matters at the end. It's like the whole point of, the whole idea about getting something out of such a bad situation is for everyone to learn, for the team to be better after it, for better processes to be established, I don't know, like basically to get people to work better together to prevent this sort of thing, and to get the company to build a better product and be better prepared for this, but not to blame people, not to find what a specific line of code was that introduced the problem, because that won't add any value to anyone. And that's something that I think is really important about like postmortems, and also basically don't do git blame, and like just look who did the last change of this file, who was the guilty one.
Besides, we all know it's David's fault.
David Richards, yeah.
That's right. Guy. If you have a David on your team, it's his fault.
I'm not sure how I feel about this, Chuck.
Hey, it's delegation, right? It's my delegation process. If it's positive, I own it. If it's not, I delegate it. One thing that I just wanted to add to all of this, we're talking about, sort of these ideas of doing a blameless postmortem and, how do we actually address these problems and things like that. Usually, I have to say the most painless ways that these get handled are on teams that have a process already in place. So, people generally, we have a process that we follow for bugs, right? This is how we document it. This is how we duplicate it. This is how we fix it. This is how we document that we fixed it. Here's how we test to make sure it's not going to happen again. And so they have all these things in place, and you just work through the checklist and it's not going to happen. And then they also have another process in place for oh crap, we're not sure exactly what the right way to handle this particular problem we're having is. They have another methodology for doing that. So it's, they go through the process of identifying the issue and, solving the problem and rolling back and deploying and all of those things. And that way, people don't freak out and start doing the wrong thing. We all know, because it's part of our process, that we're going to do a postmortem, and it's his fault is completely off the table. All of these different things. And that way, when you come into it basically knowing how to move forward, instead of waking up at 6:30 a.m. and going, oh my gosh.
Yes. I really like that too, from the perspective. I like that too from the perspective that if I take blame off the table, there's more than just the one thing to learn. Like, okay, yeah, there's that line of code, but if we're not blaming each other, hey, I was involved in some of the peer reviews. Hey, I knew a better idea and I didn't teach my team. Hey, I could really document our rollback features better. And it's not about blame. It's just about, there's a lot to learn, not just that one acute problem, but generally a lot of things have to go wrong before the big thing goes wrong. And sometimes we can't see it until the big thing's gone wrong. And so if blame is off the table, we're actually engaging in something really important. But if blame's on the table, man, game over. There's nothing going to be learned once we're talking about blame. It's defensiveness and who's going to lose their job and how am I going to tell this to my wife, or that's just not building a team. That has nothing to do with building a team.
I agree. I also just want to add, just having this process in place, it creates this environment where instead of focusing on whose fault it is, we're focused on the problem. And at the end of the process, we know that we have done everything we can to make sure that it never happens again. So instead of just solving the problem and everybody going, and going to lunch, it's a process where at the end we go, okay, we can confidently tell management or stakeholders or whoever that the problem's gone, right? And then it's not about, like you said, not about whose fault it is. It's about the problem is solved and we know that we're not going to do it again.
And, listening to myself speak, I just realized, I talk about, how am I going to explain this to my wife? And I realized, oh yeah, what if it wasn't my wife? What if it was somebody else? And then thinking about, okay, this week, what I did is there was a job position open and there was a woman I was trying to get to come take it. But the way that she sees problems is different than the way I see problems. And so she disqualified herself. In other words, the stress of problems disqualified her from engaging in taking a job. And maybe by keeping blame off the table, I know this is kind of a leap, but but the idea is that if I realize I'm having my experience, but I'm making it safe to learn, other people could be having a very different kind of an experience with this particular meltdown, and if they can learn from it too, it's inclusive in a way that probably we don't notice until people start leaving the company, or you know what I mean, that people feel really uncomfortable even though we don't realize it. So making it safe to learn and grow and not melt down is probably a deeper problem than I'd realized.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It's really important to make people feel that they're in a safe environment to admit mistakes, to admit they screwed up, because otherwise, not only because the culture in the company will be bad if it's not that way, it's also because then people might end up trying to hide their errors, which might lead to bigger problems. So that's always going to be bad. So having a culture where people know that it's fine to accept that they made a mistake, it's always healthier for everyone.
It seems to be tied to this idea of thinking out loud too, like publicly thinking. Like if it's safe to think publicly, like I can have an incomplete thought like I just had, but I realized there was something off or incomplete and that it's important for learning. And so by being able to be open, public thinking makes it possible to do things that we didn't realize were there for us.
And then in the midst of it, so let's say if you're not dealing with a detrimental, horrible incident, but you're just dealing with something a bit more minor, and this issue is going to wreak havoc on your servers. So it's not even really client facing. Maybe it's a background job that's looping over and over and over and just stacking up exponentially. And it's, taking down your servers, but you have auto scaling in place, but it's an issue that has to get fixed immediately. I think showing support to one another, and this is from across all areas of the organization, between the developers to the QA people, to the managers, and to the DevOps team, to really, set aside, like you guys are saying, the blame, and really see, how can we lift each other up, and how can we support one another so we can get this problem fixed, so we, can move on with our day or with our week. And I think that a lot of times, too many people are so focused and worried about fixing their covering their own butts that, it's almost kind of a demeaning conversation in some groups where they're like, why do you keep doing this? Or why is this happening? Why aren't you fixing it yet? And I think that's very counterproductive to solving a crisis.
Well, the other thing is if, let's say that legitimately somebody really did mess up. It was somebody's commit that caused the problem, so-and-so, maybe there's some kind of routine thing that, they tend to cause, some of these problems. Handling that during the crisis doesn't help. And then you can have the conversation afterward and say, look, what can we do to, make it so that this doesn't happen anymore? And have that conversation with them one-on-one. And, I like the idea that you have there, Dave, with just, that way we're backing each other up and we're solving the problem. And then we can talk about how to make sure that, we don't cause similar problems in the future. Because it may be a training issue. It may be some other issue. And, there's no reason to make anybody feel badly about it, as opposed to just, making sure that we all know what we're doing to make our code better in the future.
Yeah, not only that, the client doesn't care. The client doesn't care which department made the mistake. Why would they care? They just want the issue fixed. So, passing the blame game is nothing but an internal junk. And it really doesn't serve much purpose.
Well, I've actually worked at the companies where we had an issue and it was, well, somebody's head's going to roll, right? Somebody got fired, on several of these kinds of issues. And it killed the morale of the team. And eventually other people left because of that too. And so, you definitely have to avoid that. I'm not saying you don't hold people responsible when they mess up, but there are better ways to handle it than just, firing somebody just to show management that you're being tough on these kinds of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. We gave this a name. Herbert Simon talks about bounded rationality, that I could do something that makes sense if I'm just defending myself or defending my team. But if the client cares about the whole system working, then we just can't have any of that. We have to work together.
Yep, that's a really good point. And that's something that I've seen tends to happen in companies where teams kind of like, although they're working on the same product, the same system, kind of like end up working in silo. They kind of like only care about their part of the system or the responsibility working fine and as expected. So it's really important to try to avoid this sort of thing happening. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that, but one of them is just like making sure that everyone's aligned, that the whole team is basically serving the client or the customers or whoever that is. And also that if there's a problem, it's not like this team's problem, it's like everyone's problem because we're all responsible for the product.
I was in a postmortem once and not naming names, but there was a problem that was a meltdown and it was a big problem. And we had a postmortem And the person that had made the mistake wasn't in the room. And that person's boss, kind of in a soda voice, like, well, it was actually so-and-so, and I told him not to do that. And that killed the whole meeting. It's like, everyone's like, whoo, it wasn't me, so we immediately went to blame. It's like, this was a very senior person that knew better. That's not usually like that, but it's so easy to mess that up. And so I left that meeting feeling like incomplete. Like, I feel like I knew nothing new. I spent an hour of my life talking about problems, but I knew nothing new about how to avoid them or how to participate or what went right, or, because it became about that. So I thought how subtle that was, that we were talking about things and we didn't have quite the answers. And then we went to blame just in a minimal way. He was supposedly kind, but he wasn't. And, so he wasn't yelling or anything, but even just that little bit was enough to kind of kill the value of that whole meeting. And so what was there? Probably 8 or 10 people there that learned nothing except for fearing each other, which was counterproductive.
Well, and I think we've heard a couple of times the right of that, which is that it takes the responsibility away from everybody else. And that's something you need in order to fix the problem, is you need everybody to take responsibility.
Yeah. I was just like, oh, I'm so glad I'm off the hook now. What?
Whenever I need to find the root cause of something, I turn to get blame, and then I quickly realize that was old me who made the mistake. So,
common scenario.
Something get blamed will, show you that you're the one who broke it all. So something that I think is really important is that, for example, remembering one of these big public failures last year, I think it was January, maybe, I don't remember. So GitLab had like this big problem where it was clearly like someone running a command that like caused something that it shouldn't have, that took their site down for a while. And it was really good to see, like, they were really open about what happened and how they were dealing with it. It was really good to see how the company had that person back. They never although they might have not, probably should have not told that it was like a specific person, because that was kind of like irrelevant at the end of the day. They didn't like say who it was, and also like basically the whole company had that person back working to fix the problem. And also I remember like reading, because they were kind of like lifetime explaining what they were doing, that like at some point they asked that person like to leave because that person had been working for a long time. And that's also something that's really important to consider when you're in like sort of in a stressful situation that needs to be taken care of promptly. And because sometimes you have time to fix it, you have time to think about what you're going to do. Sometimes it's not like, although the problem is big, it's not something that you need to fix right away. But sometimes it is when you, for example, when you take a big site down. But even in those cases, it's always good to keep in mind that it's better to go slowly and really think through what you're doing. Although, like, it's kind of like counterintuitive. It's always going to lead to finding like the best solution if you take your time to decide what the approach to solving the problem is, instead of like rushing things.
Yeah, I really like GitLab's take on handling situations like that. They even live streamed their talks and stand-ups to, like, get together and problem solve it. Like, I don't think I've seen any other company do that. And just their take on it's really cool.
Yeah, and I love the idea of not moving fast. I mean, talk about a way to make a problem worse, right? Let's rush the solution.
Yeah, exactly. And as I mentioned before, that kind of like happened to us because we refunded people right away. It was going to take 5 days. That was too long for a lot of people. So we then had to also deal with that. And also, like one of the things about like refunding people right away is that I also mentioned this at the beginning of this episode, and is that we not only charge people, but we also pay the drivers. So although we like kind of like generated refunds to the passengers, the drivers were still on the way of getting their money, and we only realized that later. So we were gonna be paying like drivers a lot more money that we should have, and imagine getting all that money back if that's even possible. And that's kind of like the things you can miss by trying to rush a solution instead of like taking your time to think about what really needs to be done.
I like the phrase slow down to speed up. You know, if we can slow down, be mindful, then we can actually do better. Well, that killed the conversation. Are we ready for picks?
No, actually, I do. I know we're running short on time. That really leads down to the core. The core of it is how much of what we've experienced could have been avoided had we spent more time, and how much business opportunity would we have lost had we spent the time. So there's always that constant battle between the two, and unfortunately, it typically, unless you're working at NASA, it typically falls somewhere in between. So failing is part of development. I'd say if you're not failing, you're doing it wrong. It really comes down to how much time you're allotting yourself to spend to make sure it's done right. Unfortunately for me, it's always been more towards on the business side than the craft side.
You know, and I like to think about things like the 2x4, you know, or the brick, you know, these basic ideas that they got implemented enough that it became something physical. It was an idea that became something physical, that became something copied, became a system with a pattern, and it grows. And now it's like, what would it take to rip it out? It's like, yeah, by having fundamentals done well in our code, our thoughts are becoming something solid in somebody's life. And it does take, because a lot more is happening than just the code running. You know, people's lives are changing, or the team is figuring it out, or we've got an easy to test solution or a hard to test solution, or, you know, we're totally avoiding a part of the system. So we've got to get our thinking there. But yeah, I think the simple things help remind me that the work of a software developer is really got to be down tight to the fundamentals.
All right. Anything else we should dive into here before we do picks? All right. Well, let's do some picks then. Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Dave, do you want to start us with picks?
Sorry about that. You know, I was not on mute, then I put myself on mute when I started to talk. That's how it works, right? So I really don't have any good picks, but the one pick I do have is Costco Glasses. So I recently broke my glasses. Rather, my kids were tackling me and they broke my eyeglasses, and I had to get some new ones. So I went to Costco because I'm always there, and I checked out their eyeglass shop. And I must say, the price and the quality, I got a pair of Oakley glasses for like $200 before insurance kicked in. So with insurance and everything, it was like $100. But a few years ago before that, I went to get glasses and they were like almost $400 for something very similar before insurance kicked in. So they definitely have good quality stuff and cheap.
Awesome. David, what are your picks?
So I've got two today. One of them is, if you guys don't know Peter Drucker, He's this great old man. Call him the father of modern management. And in 1959, he started talking about the knowledge worker. And in 1992, he predicted what it's going to be like in 2020. And a lot of it fits our conversation today. So I have an article about what did he predict and get right. And it involves the autonomy and the thinking and the learning that we're talking about today. And the other one is another article, a different view of mindfulness by, again, one of my favorite people, Zat Rana. And what I like about this is he's getting down to our identity of self. In other words, if we're going to figure out how to solve hard problems, we can't like identify ourselves as, hey, I am the senior dev of the team. And so that's my identity. And anything that challenges that, I've got to fight back. So learning how to be able to work with hard problems requires a little bit of slowdown. And it's a great article.
Awesome. Eric, what are your picks?
I got 2 picks. The first one is it's a little bit offbeat here. It's actually Django, the Python framework. And so I started working. I started moving CodeSponsor to be open source, and it is I'm moving it all into Django. And the reason is because the company that I'm working with now, they all work in Python, and it's been a fairly somewhat simple process learning, but I'm floored with some of the niceties of Django that it offers out of the box over Rails. Primarily the admin tools. The admin tools are fantastic. The amount of time that I've saved by using those and the speed of which I'm up and running is unbelievable. So super happy with that. And then the second thing is, it's kind of a weird pick. I want to pick a cat or cats. The weird thing about cats is they're not like dogs. They're not easy to have love you, right? You can't win a cat over just by petting it and giving it a treat, and all of a sudden you're his best friend. We recently got a cat 3 days ago. This cat is it's like a game, it's like a dance where we go in this room and we're trying to acclimate the cat to our home. So I have to go in there and sit down and just gently talk to the cat for like an hour. Like if you look right now, this is the first time it's come up and looked at me. Here's people listening can't see, but there's my new cat, right? So these cats are just they're like a challenge. Like anybody who adopts a cat and then starts gets them to love you, man, good on you, because that's not an easy thing. So those are my picks.
Nice.
What have you named your cat?
I would have come up with a really good name, but it was already named. This cat, though, is like the reason I bought it is I wanted a cat similar to something like the cat that
Thunder Horse.
Right. I wanted a cat similar to the one owned by what's it, Tender Love, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted a grumpy cat, and I found this cat, and it was just the goofiest looking thing ever. And here, let me show. I know listeners can't hear, but here's my cat, and you can kind of see it. I'll tweet it if you guys follow me. I'll tweet a photo of the cat, but it is just a goofy bugger, right? So, and that's why I fell in love with it. It's just so goofy.
Does it have its own Twitter account already?
That's not a bad idea. Anyway, yeah, love my cat.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. Now, I've been going through some stuff with my dad's health, and a few things that I have been doing lately that have just kind of come out of a lot of the stuff that I've been working on. Related to that, I've been searching Craigslist, and Craigslist kind of drives me crazy, and I like it at the same time. But I've been looking for wheelchair lifts to get him in and out of his house, and it's pretty amazing how much stuff you can find on Craigslist. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Craigslist. The only issue is that you have to search different locales. Though I did find that when you're doing a search, if you look in the top left corner, this is on my computer. I haven't been doing it on my phone, and so I don't know how it works really on mobile devices, but you can actually change to nearby locales and look in those. So I've been looking all over the Western United States for a wheelchair lift that we could put in on his house. And, found a bunch of options, and I'll probably be calling them after we get off this call. Another one that also came up with a lot of the places I was looking was eBay. And I haven't used eBay for quite a while, not since I was buying collectibles of various kinds. And anyway, a lot of options on there too. So if you're looking for anything like that, then, it's kind of a nice option for that. So I'm going to pick both of those as just, places to find sort of non-conventional stuff. One other thing that I'm going to pick with regards to Craigslist in particular. No, it's another classified site. But one thing that I did figure out, and this is just another tip, I've been wanting to buy myself a truck for a while. I drive a truck. I don't know if you've seen it, Eric or Dave, but it's got a rusted out top. One of the doors was replaced, so it's black, and the rest of the truck is white. And anyway, well, the parts of it that still have paint on it are white. Let me put it that way. So anyway, it's this really crappy truck, and I've been wanting more of a full-size truck that I can more easily get my kids into and things like that. And I figured out that if you go look on the classified sites for non-running vehicles, their definition of non-running vehicles means it needs repair. In other words, it may still run, but it just needs a part or two. And so if you are inclined toward working on a car, and I kind of enjoy it myself, you can usually find a truck or a car for a really killer deal. Some of them are listed for a few $100s, and they need like a couple $100s in parts and a couple hours labor. And so I've been really kind of digging that. Locally, we have one called KSL Classifieds, and KSL is the local NBC affiliate. And then they have a classified site that's related to that. And they have dozens and dozens, hundreds of cars that are listed as non-running. And I could literally go up there, drive it back here, and then fix the couple of issues that make it not run real nice. So anyway, that's kind of what I've been in the middle of lately. Is I've been dreaming about a truck just to, deal with all the other crap that's going down right now. So I'll pick those. Sebastian, do you have some picks for us?
So sure, I have a few picks. All of them are apps for the phone. The first one goes kind of like in the same line of David's first pick, which is like a mindfulness geared application. It's called Headspace. I've been trying to get into like the habit of meditating daily for a while, been doing it on and off. And I think this app is really cool. If you're interested in doing it, it kind of like guides you through the first steps and then make it really easy to kind of like create the habit of meditating daily. Another one would be, second pick would be, You Need a Budget. I don't know if people here knows it. It's just like a really nice app you can use to kind of like budget your monthly stuff on expenses and also keep track of what you're actually spending money on. I've been using different applications, different approaches, even spreadsheets to do this. And this one does a really good job and makes it really easy to do exactly what I wanted to do. So that's why I recommend people checking it out if they're interested in using an app to track their expenses and put their budget in. And the last one would be One Blocker, which is an application not only for the phone, but actually also for the laptop, for Mac laptops or computers. It's really good at in blocking stuff that you shouldn't be checking when you're working. So sometimes it gets really easy to get distracted looking at Twitter or just reading articles in different places. So sometimes like having something remind you that you shouldn't be doing that, it's helpful and it's been working good for me. So check it out.
Awesome. Now, if people want to see what you're working on these days, do you have a blog? Are you on Twitter? Maybe your GitHub handle? Anything like that?
Yep. So I am Seba Soga all over the internet. So sebasoga.com is my website. There's not a lot there, but you should probably just like check Twitter I'm also Soga there, GitHub as well. And yeah, so at CookPad, we have a really cool blog where we share the stuff we're doing. It's called sourcediving.com. I think there's a few interesting articles there that people can check out.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you for coming, Sebastian. It's always fun to talk about sort of the non-code parts of code that are painful and interesting. So,
yeah, it was my pleasure. I had a great time talking to you guys and also hearing your stories.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll catch y'all next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.